My name's Pugh. I'm a freelance production manager and digital producer. I'm pleased to have been brought in by Unlimited to share some of the things I've learned over the last few years about sharing creative work online, and hopefully give you some prompts and some ideas about how you could kickstart your own practice looking at sharing work digitally. This is the second of 3 short films looking at the subject of capturing and creating work to share online. The 3 films are broken down into these subjects. The first film starts to look at some of the what and why, some of the questions we should be asking ourselves before we start planning our digital work, particularly thinking about how we're engaging with our audiences online. This film is going to start looking at stagecraft and thinking about how we can start to apply some of that same rigour that we would if we were in a live space, that attention to detail, and how we can start to reimagine that and reinvent that to the work that we're preparing to share digitally. The third film goes into more of the technical nuts and bolts, looking at different setups that can help you capture your work, depending on what sort of skill level you're at and what resources you have available. So, back to stagecraft. What do we mean by this in the context of digital work? We talked in the first film about engaging with your audience, and continuing that idea in this film, we need to start thinking about how we can be really intentional in the work that we're producing. What are the things we want our audiences to see or hear? What are the clues or triggers that we can use to convey meaning and mood and help tell the story most effectively? There's so many things that we take for granted when we work in venues, that when we're starting to produce work online, especially at the moment while we're working from home, we're not always thinking about things in the same way. We need to look at what sort of simple techniques we can use to raise the production values of the work that we're doing without needing big budgets or complicated resources. There's 3 areas that I want to touch on in this film. First off, think about framing and positioning your camera. Where is it that you're filming or recording? I want to then go on to think about the props and the settings and how you use them. And then also finally we'll look at lighting and sound. Look at some of the things that we could try and maybe some of the things to avoid as well. So, framing or creating the scene, whether you're working at home or on stage. Start off by thinking about the story you're telling. How would you set the work if it was on stage, in a theatre or in a gallery? It's often not that easy to recreate that sort of thing from home, but with a bit of thought about character or message, what's the essence of the piece? What do you want the audience to feel or understand from the work? And then think about the best way of recreating that for a small screen. It might help you hone in and strip out anything that's unnecessary. There are some simple things that you can do to just raise your production quality a little bit and help keep the audience focused on your content rather than noticing the shortcomings of your technical setup. I've just changed settings for a moment to show you what's a very familiar looking scene. We've all had this in recent weeks while we've been in lockdown, staring up at someone from a tabletop on a Zoom call, on a Skype meeting, looking up to the corner of their room, often in less than ideal conditions with backlight coming in through the window, those sorts of things. Now, to a certain extent, on a Zoom call or a Skype meeting, it's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. But when someone's sharing their work online, they're doing a rehearsed reading, they're perhaps sharing a monologue, a little bit more thought perhaps could be put into the framing with some relatively simple techniques employed to make sure that the work's being presented in the best way. In the same room at the same time, I've been able to film this footage, just thinking a little bit about where I'm putting myself and where I'm putting the camera and how I'm addressing the audience through the lens and on the screen at the receiver's end. You don't necessarily need an external camera with a tripod. Sometimes a laptop on a stack of books will do the job. But if you're addressing the audience directly, try and look directly into the camera. Try and identify where it is before you start recording. On a laptop, it's very often in the top band of the lid, and similarly on a phone, it'll be on one of the edges. If you look directly into the lens, you'll be looking directly out of the screen at the other end and engaging directly with the audience. It's important to think about orientation. If you're working on a smartphone, think about which way round you're mounting it or which way round you're holding it. Do you want to present the work in landscape or portrait? Now, most TV, film, cinema, computer screens, they're in landscape orientation. But if people are watching content on a smartphone, they've got the option. So certain channels like Instagram, for example, prefer square or portrait footage to be shared, whereas other platforms, YouTube, perhaps are better, more suited to landscape footage. So it's really important to think about where your audience will be watching. Once we get back out and about and start filming work in other spaces, in venues with or without audiences, the same principles apply. How can you get your camera into a position that not only would replicate what the live audience member might see, but also give that little bit of added value for the people watching online? A close-up and intimate experience of watching a quiet conversation, for example, one camera locked off at the back of the auditorium doesn't really give the online audience the best chance to engage with that sort of content. It's worth borrowing framing ideas from TV and film. Okay, so just a tip about filming in theatres. Are your cameras positioned outside the normal sight lines? Designers and directors spend a lot of time controlling what the audience sees. And often when you're filming a live event, the camera might be at the edge of an audience, so it can see beyond the stage action into the wings. I've had an experience once where I've had to edit around a shot of a stage manager in the wing handing a prop on stage. The live audience couldn't see it because they were positioned just that little bit closer to the centre. But from where the camera was, we were just slightly outside the sight lines. In a theatre or a gallery, we spend a lot of time controlling what the audience see. Props and dressings are the tools to help us tell the story, and the same consideration should be given when we're presenting work online. Are the audience only seeing what we want them to see and not what we don't? So once you've thought about your framing and you've got your camera positioned, record a bit of film and then look back at it from a really critical perspective. What's going on in the background that shouldn't be? Is there a clock on the wall? Is there washing drying on the radiator? Think about where the scene is set. Is everything in view appropriate? Is it intentional? If it isn't, it can distract from the mood, from the atmosphere, and from the character of the piece. It can be really hard to control the environment that we're filming in, particularly at home, so you might need to think about reducing the amount of it that's seen by the audience. For example, change your position to limit the amount of background in shot. It's better to get a small number of props and settings really right and really consistent. What are you wearing? Is it costume or should it be? Same principles apply when we're thinking about costume. How can you be intentional about what you're wearing? What does it say about the character or the mood or the scene or the piece of writing that you're sharing? With all these areas, you should be asking yourself, what would you do if you were in a theatre creating this piece of work? And then start thinking about how you can reimagine and re-engineer those techniques to bring out the best for the small screen audience. There's some fairly simple things that you can do when you're working from home, producing work online, to help ensure that you're getting the best quality, but also just taking that little bit of control over the lighting and sound in the environment that you're working in. Theatre lighting is a great way to convey mood or atmosphere, but it also gives clues about the location and the time of day and that kind of thing. We need to think about these same things when we're producing work to share online. Try out some things. See what happens when you open the curtains or close the curtains. What difference does it make to the lighting in the room and how it's translating into the shot that you're filming? What desk lamps or other lights do you have available that you could switch on or switch off or put at the edge of the scene or in front, or those sorts of things. It's okay to experiment. It's okay to try out some stuff. And actually it's really well worth it because some very simple techniques can really make a big difference. If you just need a warm general wash, it's well worth trying filming just using natural light. Can you film facing a window? That gives a good general wash. At the moment, I've got no electronic lighting or no specialist lighting for this film. I'm just sat with a window and the camera between me and the window. It's best to avoid strong sources of light behind you. They can put your face in shadow, or the computer or camera will just be adjusting too much to balance for the strongest light in the space, and sometimes that can leave you in the dark. Now, unless that's the look that you're going for. But really, it's crucial to take some time to experiment. Try out some ideas. It can be quite good fun, and actually you might be surprised by the results you can get with some really simple techniques. And remember, the other thing that's crucial about this is if it's happening outside of the shot, nobody needs to see how you achieved the lighting that you did. As with setting and framing, it's very easy for background noise to be distracting, especially if it's not meant to be present in the world of the piece. Watch out for the obvious things like barking dogs or noisy traffic, or as I'm dealing with at the moment, the sounds of builders working on the house opposite. If you're working from a script, it's important to think about turning the pages quietly. It sounds like a really small detail, but if you think about it, the script is likely to be in front of you and is likely to be closer to the microphone, to the camera, and as you turn your pages, they might well be noisier than you expect. You also need to think about consistent background noise, the sorts of things that are just going to create that low-level hum in the recording. So think about running washing machines, buzzing fridge, extractor fans, or even things like ticking clocks. These all compromise the quality of the final recording. If you can, try and position your mic away from any sort of background noise. Use an external mic if you can. That way you can bring it closer to the sound source, i.e. you. That'll help cut out a lot of the background noise, but it's also likely to be a better quality microphone as well. For all sorts of reasons, we want clarity in the recording that we make, and boomy acoustics or resonant spaces can make it hard to listen to spoken word, for example. If your recordings sound like you're in a box or in a cave, you need to try and find a more acoustically dry space to work in, somewhere with soft furnishing or carpets or curtains. Kitchens and bathrooms tend not to be very good. There's too many hard reflective surfaces in there. Bedrooms, living rooms, things with that soft environment tend to be much better. If it's proving to be really problematic, imagine that your walls are like mirrors, and wherever you can see your laptop in those imaginary mirrors, you need to be trying to soften and deaden that space, because that'll limit the amount of reverberated or bounced back sound coming into the recording. As an alternative, if it works for the way that you're recording, come closer in. Maybe build a pillow fort around your laptop. Make sure you're not covering the camera up. That can have exactly the same effect of just deadening the sound and just focusing on the sound that you're wanting it to record. If you're recording just audio, you could try sitting facing a full wardrobe or do the recording in a coat cupboard, somewhere where you've got as much soft around you as possible to give a nice dry, clean, neutral sound. With all the things that we've discussed in this film, the most important idea to hold on to is about being intentional. Don't include anything in your work online that shouldn't be there and isn't relevant to the piece. A couple of final tips. Always record a little excerpt first to check your framing and to check your sound. And then watch it back from a really critical perspective. Make sure you're scrutinising the detail. Can you improve the look and feel at all? Can you improve the lighting or sound? Is there anything in the frame that shouldn't be there? Give yourself permission to get it right. It will take time and energy and effort to create work, just as it would if you were in a theatre. Finally, if you find it distracting, recording and seeing yourself on the screen at the same time, just simply prop up a piece of paper in front of the screen, but make sure you're not covering over the camera again. There are a wealth of opportunities and possibilities when it comes to sharing your work online, whether that's through live streaming or creating digital assets. If you start the process by thinking about your audience and what you want to say to them, and then imagine how that can be done using the tools and techniques that online sharing offers, it'll help you to create meaningful work and work that really touches people. This is the second of 3 films. In the next film, we're going to be looking at the technical nuts and bolts. We'll look at some examples of different setups and what you need to get started. I hope that some of the things that we're talking about in these films will help you reflect on your practice and give you a bit more confidence to take steps into sharing your work online.